Why no one could explain the vanishing of the Blackwood family. The air in the Pacific Northwest carries a certain weight, a damp, verdant scent that clings to the ancient pines and the mist rising from glacial lakes. It is a landscape that promises solitude, a profound quiet broken only by the whisper of the wind through the forest canopy or the distant cry of an eagle. It was precisely this promise that drew the Blackwood family to their secluded cabin on the shores of Emerald Lake. And it was within this very sanctuary that they simply ceased to exist. Imagine it, a family complete and vibrant one morning present, the next morning gone. Not a trace, not a struggle, not a whisper of warning. John Blackwood, a successful author whose thrillers often explored the very edges of human fear. His wife, Sarah, an artist whose canvases captured the raw, untamed beauty of their surroundings. And their two children, Lily, a bright-eyed 9-year-old with a penchant for sketching forest creatures, and Tom, a boisterous 7-year-old whose laughter often echoed across the lake. They were, by all accounts, pillars of their small, tight-knit community in the foothills of the Cascades, known for their warmth, their intellectual curiosity, and their deep love for their remote home. Their property, a meticulously maintained cabin built from local timber and stone, sat a mile down a winding gravel track, shielded from the nearest road by a dense curtain of Douglas firs. It was a place where the internet was often unreliable and cell service a distant memory, a deliberate choice for a family seeking respite from the clamor of the modern world. Their isolation, once a source of peace, would become the first, most chilling facet of their undoing. On a Tuesday morning in late October, the Blackwood home offered a scene of perfect domestic stasis. The kettle sat cold on the stove, a half-empty jar of local honey next to it. 4 plates, still bearing the crumbs of toast, were arranged around the kitchen table. Lily's half-finished drawing of a deer lay next to her cereal bowl. Tom's favorite stuffed bear rested on the arm of a living room armchair, poised as if its small owner had just stepped away for a moment. The front door was unlocked, a gentle draft stirring the lace curtains. 2 cars sat in the driveway, their engines cold. The family's golden retriever, Aspen, usually an enthusiastic greeting committee, was nowhere to be seen, though her leash hung innocently by the back door. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no overturned furniture, no evidence of a struggle, no notes, no messages. Just an empty house, holding its breath in the profound, unsettling silence. This was not merely a disappearance, it was an erasure. 4 lives, utterly removed from their context, leaving behind only the ghost of a routine abruptly interrupted. It was a phenomenon that defied explanation, a puzzle whose pieces were not missing, but had simply never existed in the first place. The Blackwood family did not leave, they were simply asterisk gone asterisk. And no one, from the most seasoned detective to the most fervent conspiracy theorist, could ever truly explain why. The scent of decaying paper and forgotten ambition hung heavy in the precinct archives, a suffocating shroud that clung to Thorne's overcoat. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through grimy windows, illuminating the ghosts of investigations past. He wasn't here for new leads on his current, visceral nightmare of ritualistic murders. He was here for parallels, for echoes, for the faint, disquieting whisper of asterisk pattern he felt was just beyond his grasp. His fingers, calloused from years of turning pages and pulling triggers, traced the laminated cover of the Blackwood file. Case 87013, Unexplained Vanishing Asterisk. John Blackwood, the acclaimed author, Sarah, his ethereal artist wife, Lily, their bright 7-year-old, Tom, the spirited 5-year-old. 4 lives meticulously catalogued, then abruptly, impossibly erased. The reports within the file detailed the alarm raised by Mrs. Albright, a neighbor from Emerald Lake, who'd grown concerned after days of untouched mail and an uncharacteristically silent house. Her call to the local sheriff had been tinged with an unease that permeated every page Thorne now held. He remembered the tremor in her voice from the old recordings, a woman whose suburban calm had been shattered by the sudden, chilling silence of her usually vibrant neighbors. The initial response had been perfunctory, a routine wellness check escalating into a bewildering search. The scene itself, Thorne remembered from the grainy photographs, was a tableau of interrupted domesticity that had chilled even the most hardened officers. A half-eaten breakfast, pancakes, syrup congealed on ceramic, still sat on the pine kitchen table. Toys lay scattered in the living room, a train track curving through an imaginary landscape. Sarah's easel stood by a sun-drenched window, a half-finished landscape of the surrounding forest staring blankly at an empty room. A singular, unsettling detail. A teacup, still steaming faintly according to the first officer on scene, as if Sarah had just stepped away for a moment. Most disturbing were the small details. The two golden retrievers, Barnaby and Daisy, left in their outdoor kennel, their water bowl full, a week's worth of kibble in a sealed container nearby. John's battered pickup and Sarah's sensible sedan remained in the gravel driveway. Doors unlocked, windows unlatched, allowing the cool forest air to drift through the silent house. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransacking, no struggle. No note. It wasn't a departure, it was a cessation. The air of immediate, yet inexplicable, abandonment hung thick enough to taste in the initial reports. The feeling of an empty stage, the actors having simply dissolved into the wings, yet the audience, the world, still waiting for the next act. Like they just blinked out, the lead detective, a man named Miller, had written in his field notes, his usual precision dissolving into frustrated bewilderment. Vanished mid-sentence. The search that followed had been monumental for such a remote jurisdiction. Ground teams, K-9 units, aerial surveys. They scoured every acre of the dense Pacific Northwest wilderness surrounding the cabin, stretching for miles in every direction. The lake was dredged. Abandoned logging trails were painstakingly walked. Every cave, every rock shelter, every crevice of the rugged terrain was examined. Nothing. No footprints leading away, no scraps of clothing, no signs of a struggle, no bodies. The forest, a vast, indifferent witness, held its secrets close, offering only the indifferent murmur of wind through pine needles. Inside the cabin, forensic experts had meticulously sifted through every particle. Dusting for prints, swabbing for trace DNA, scrutinizing every surface. And yet the void persisted. It was as if the family had simply dissolved, leaving only the ghosts of their routine. A perfectly preserved, perfectly empty shell. But there was one anomaly, a detail so minuscule it had almost been overlooked, buried deep within the supplemental reports. Miller's addendum, a single paragraph typed long after the official report had been filed, spoke of it. Hidden on the underside of a kitchen table drawer, where no casual glance would ever fall, a small symbol had been painstakingly carved. Ancient, geometric, unsettling in its unfamiliarity. It wasn't graffiti. It was deliberate, almost ritualistic, cut with a precision that belied its obscure placement. It had been photographed, logged, and ultimately filed away, an inexplicable detail in an already inexplicable case, never identified, never explained. To Miller, it was just another dead end. But to Thorne, sifting through the dust of decades, burdened by the fresh horror of current atrocities, It vibrated with an unholy resonance. A fragment of obscure lore, perhaps, that even then suggested a predictive anarchy, a hidden hand. He stared at the faded black and white image of the symbol, a jagged, arcane pattern. This wasn't just a baffling disappearance. It was a premonition. The true horror wasn't what they found, but what they didn't. The utter, terrifying absence. And in that void, Thorne now sensed a deeper, more chilling presence. A watcher. Waiting. The labyrinth had begun its insidious construction long before he'd even been born. The faded image of the symbol, a jagged hieroglyph of unknown origin, had been the anchor of Thorne's obsession for weeks. Now it was etched onto the screen of his burner phone, accompanied by a single, untraceable message. The labyrinth remembers Thorne. And it hungers. It was not a threat, not overtly. It was an invitation, cold and absolute, into the same predictive anarchy he'd only just begun to discern. The true horror wasn't what they found in the Blackwood cabin, but what they didn't. The utter, terrifying absence. And in that void, Thorne now sensed a deeper, more chilling presence. A watcher. Waiting. The labyrinth had begun its insidious construction long before he'd even been born. The message was cryptic, yet it resonated with a visceral precision, twisting the old cold case into something acutely current. The phrasing, the obscure reference to the labyrinth, pulsed with a familiarity that chilled Thorne to the bone. It echoed the very language of the ancient texts his former mentor, Professor Alastair Finch, had dedicated his life to deciphering. The suspicion, sharp and unwelcome, solidified into a dangerous certainty. The rain was a steady percussion against the leaded panes of Professor Finch's study, a room perpetually shrouded in the scent of aged paper, pipe tobacco, and something faintly metallic, the faint tang of old knowledge, perhaps. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through stacks of forgotten tomes, their leather bindings cracked and worn. Finch, a man whose skeletal frame seemed held together by the sheer force of his intellect, looked up from a manuscript, his spectacles perched on the very tip of his nose. His eyes, magnified and startlingly blue, held a glint of recognition, but also something unreadable. Detective Thorne, Finch's voice was a dry rustle, like leaves skittering across a tombstone. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Still chasing ghosts, I presume. Thorne did not waste time on pleasantries. He placed the burner phone on Finch's cluttered desk, displaying the image of the Blackwood symbol and the accompanying message. This symbol, Alastair. And the phrase, "You know it, don't you?" Finch leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the screen. A faint tremor ran through his aged hand as he reached for a porcelain pipe, though he did not light it. "Ah, the Blackwood sigil," he murmured, a breath of air escaping his lips. A fascinating, if rather crude, rendition of the asterisk sigillum aeternum. The ever seal. Seldom seen outside of obscure cultic texts from the Hellenistic period. And the message, the labyrinth remembers and it hungers, a poetic flourish though certainly evocative. He looked at Thorne, his blue eyes suddenly piercing. Why the renewed interest, Thorne? That case was closed, wasn't it? An unexplained vanishing, a euphemism for we haven't a clue. It's no longer just a cold case, Alastair. It's connected. There have been others. Similar disappearances. And the victims, they've had this symbol, or variants of it, carved into personal effects. Thorne kept his voice level, betraying none of the escalating panic that gnawed at him. Someone is using the Blackwood vanishing as a template. Or perhaps they're finally finishing what started there. Finch sat back, steepled his fingers, and regarded Thorne with an unnerving calm. Finishing. You suggest the Blackwoods were incomplete, that their disappearance was merely a precursor. He paused, allowing the implication to hang in the air, heavy and disturbing. The sigillum aeternum asterisk thorn is not merely a symbol of protection, as some would believe. In certain contexts, it is a key, a threshold, a gate, if you will, to spaces beyond our conventional understanding. Thorne felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Finch's words, delivered with academic detachment, painted a terrifying picture. He remembered the Blackwood cabin, eerily untouched, a breakfast half-eaten, toys scattered, pets left behind. An immediate departure, yet no evidence of how or where. Just an empty home and a chilling silence. The absence of evidence was itself the most terrifying clue. And what kind of space does it open, Alistair? Thorne pressed, his voice taut. Where did they go? And why are others following the same path now? Finch's gaze drifted past Thorne, seemingly fixed on the rain-streaked window. Some paths are not meant for walking, detective. They are meant for dissolving, for being absorbed. The Blackwoods, perhaps they weren't taken. Perhaps they simply yielded. His words, evasive yet profoundly knowledgeable, chilled Thorne. The professor's serene detachment, coupled with his deep familiarity with the arcane, suggested not just academic interest, but an unsettling proximity to the very horror Thorne was investigating. As Finch spoke, Thorne felt a familiar chill, not from the damp room but from within. A ghost of failure, the Blackwood case itself, whispered in the periphery of his thoughts. The way he had dismissed the symbol then, as a mere anomaly. The way he had allowed the official narrative of unexplained vanishing to settle, easing his own unease. He saw fragments of his own past failures, his dismissals of the irrational, reflected in Finch's knowing eyes. Was he merely a detective chasing a killer, or was he a pawn in a larger, more ancient game, echoing the same mistakes, the same blindness that had led to the Blackwoods' erasure? The line blurred, thin as a hair, between his professional duty and a looming personal abyss. He was standing on the precipice of something far older and more dangerous than any killer he'd ever hunted. And Finch, his old mentor, seemed to be not just a guide to the abyss, but perhaps its guardian. The chill that settled in Thorne's bones after Finch's last words was not merely from the late autumn air. It was the icy grip of revelation, the horrifying clarity that his pursuit of a killer had become a dance on the edge of an abyss. The line between hunter and hunted, between solving a case and becoming part of its ancient, unknowable mechanism, had not simply blurred, it had dissolved. He was on his own, the ghost of his badge a hollow weight against his chest, the city's indifference a constant, gnawing presence. Finch's final, almost imperceptible nod, combined with a hastily scribbled address on a napkin, a forgotten quadrant of the old industrial docks, rarely visited even by the city's forgotten, had been Thorne's only lead. And a date. A specific chilling date, just hours away, coinciding with a rare celestial alignment. An eclipse, Finch had whispered, barely audible, as if the word itself held power, a key to unlock something monstrous. The city, usually a symphony of endless noise, seemed to hold its breath. A thick, oppressive fog had rolled in from the harbor, muffling the usual clamor, painting the streetlights in halos of sickly yellow. Every shadow seemed to deepen, to coil, to watch. Thorne moved through it like a phantom himself, his breath pluming in the cold, his old sedan, a relic of a past life, churning through slick streets. He was a singular point of frantic motion in a world slowing to a halt, heading towards a crescendo he didn't fully comprehend, but felt with every fiber of his being. His phone, a dead weight in his pocket, was useless. His contacts, his network, his former allies all out of reach, or unwilling to touch the dangerous, esoteric fringe he now inhabited. The department had disavowed him, seeing only a man consumed by obsession, chasing shadows where they saw only mundane crime. But Thorne knew better. He had seen the symbols, felt the resonance, heard the whispers that spoke of patterns older than recorded history, of a terror that refused to be contained by conventional explanation. The Blackwood symbol, once an inexplicable anomaly, now pulsed in his mind as a key, a prelude to this final, terrifying act. The docks were a labyrinth of rusted metal and decaying concrete, the air thick with the smell of brine and industrial decay. Abandoned warehouses loomed like skeletal giants, their broken windows like vacant eyes. Thorne parked his car a mile out, preferring the anonymity of the fog and the cover of darkness. He moved on foot, his senses heightened, every creak of metal, every drip of water, a potential threat. He clutched the heavy wrench he'd grabbed from his trunk, his only weapon. He thought of the victims, the precise, ritualistic cuts, the blood gathered in obsidian bowls. He thought of the Blackwoods, their meticulously ordered lives, their sudden, inexplicable erasure. Was this final ritual the answer? The culmination of whatever ancient force had reached out from the periphery to claim them, to claim others, to make its presence known. The sense of an ending, stark and irreversible, settled around him. He wasn't just chasing a killer anymore. He was rushing towards a tearing in the fabric of the world, a moment where the hidden mechanics would be laid bare. The stakes were no longer a single life, or even a handful of lives. They felt cosmic. He could feel it in the charged air, the unnatural stillness. The city was holding its breath, waiting for the moon to swallow the sun, for a brief, terrifying glimpse into the true, shadowed heart of its oldest secret. Thorne, alone and exposed, was walking directly into the darkest hour. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that whatever he found there, it would change him forever.